Welcome to our last discursive event of our 70th anniversary festival, OK Oscar. Thank you for being here with us in this kind of rather painful heat, but we try our best. And maybe it's part of our conversation, maybe. Anyway, thank you for coming, also for those who joined us online. The discursive event Healing of a Bad Painting Part 2 is basically a continuation of a long film night we had here on Monday with films by painters, brilliantly curated by Kaya, which are Kerstin Breetsch and Debo Eilers. And there was actually a very interesting film by Paul McCarthy called Painters, which we could read as a kind of performative institutional critique of painting and the system that kind of is around paintings in our days. And I think we come back to that maybe on a different level tonight. So I'm pleased to introduce you to Kaya and Kristina Schmidt, who is an artist and a former student of Kaya, Kerstin Breetsch, or both? Both, right. And now she's the assistant for their class at the Summer Academy. And I'm actually very happy that she kind of agreed to run this discussion with Kaya, as unfortunately, as different to what was announced, Stefan Dillemuth can't be here with us tonight. Kaya, again, Kerstin Breetsch and Debo Eilers, acts as a fictional and concrete body conjoining formal, painterly and metabolic procedures in their identity productions. Collaboratively, they traverse the boundaries between painting and sculpture, fusing both genres into a new hybrid artistic approach. Containers for a kind of intersubjectivity that both retain and sublimates the artist's hands, the works also offer a geologic logic and an organic history of their own making, as they preserve and pulverize a retool to the former Kaya performance objects and ephemera into upcoming works, and reuse from Kaya's past into multiple ever-becoming body. More recently, Kaya has moved beyond the figure of Kaya Serene and has become a collaborative platform that reaches beyond the artistic output of Breetsch and Eilers to incorporate their creative energies of the community that it builds around itself for each iteration of the project. Often, this includes fellow artists, students, curators, academics, and the institution that plays host to the many Kaya projects. Kaya's work has been shown around the world within exhibitions at Haus der Kunst in Munich, Friderizianum in Kassel, M-Woods in Beijing, Museum Brandhorst in Munich, MUMUC in Vienna, Kunsthaus Bregenz, Fondazione Memo in Rome, Whitney Biennial, and many, many others. Welcome, Kaya and Kristina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We thought we'd start with an excerpt of a video, just to get the mood going of Kaya, and then we're going to read a little text in relation to the video. But maybe we just, is it loud enough? Yeah.
I stare at the horizon so long that it births an image in my retina. I wonder if that might count as painting. The humans are occasionally yell and shout. This disrupts my thinking terribly.
selection from the journals of Schmidt. Today, when I live, you can travel from one side to the other in a few paces. And from a bird's eye view, the place looks like a pill. The two curved ends are grassy and soft. A moat like a race track surrounds us. In the middle of the pill is a large square building where I sleep. My name is Schmidt, and I was born in a small zoo in East Germany in a town called Strasbourg in 1981. I'm a bear, and I'm a conceptual artist. My name means pout in German, and I was given this name by a vote of Berliners in a newspaper survey. For me, this is a neat but effective conceptual gesture to assault the myth of individual artistic genius. My name is drawn from others, a crowdsourced subjectivity. The Bärenzwinger is located in Kölnischer Park in Berlin, right behind the Märkisches Museum. Bärenzwinger means bear pit, and it was officially opened on the 17th of August in 1939 on the occasion of the 700th anniversary of Berlin. For nearly 80 years, people came to see us, Berlin's heraldic animals, at this pit. I was an artist in residence there from 1988 to 2015. I made installations and performances using natural materials. I had two lovers, named Taps and Thilo, and 15 cubs. All of them were taken away from me except of Maxi, my first daughter. I died in 2015 when the Bärenzwinger closed. In 2018, my spirit was reborn as part of the artist group Kaya. I no longer have a physical body, but I'm a part of the third body of Kaya. For where I'm now, time runs in circles, and I've been trying to write down what I remember.
November 23, 1988. My first day at the residency. It is very prestigious and I am excited. I am part of the third generation of bears to receive it. I have food and drink and a warm bed indefinitely. I have a built-in audience for my work. Humans, both young and old, come from far away. I am stimulated by the change of seasons. The park brings a variety of people, but it also has its quirks. The trees that we have are not always the best for scratching. I also can't leave, so it does at times feel like a cage. January 3rd, 1990. I started a performance today. It consisted of a single head of lettuce left out on the tire swing, left to decay from the elements. Every time someone from the audience took a picture, I removed one peel of the lettuce and buried it quietly underneath the tree. I've tried to hide it from our keeper, but she brings it back to my cage anyways and looks confused. I stare at the horizon for so long that it burns an image in my retina. I wonder if that might count as a painting. The humans are rude occasionally and yell and shout. This disrupts my thinking terribly. March 18, 1990. Today, I had my 12th cub, and she was taken away from me. Taps was also put down. I am sad, but I won't miss him. He was really annoying. He was a sculptor. He used the leaves from our birch tree to make what he called utopic futures. He would leave them all over the floor. Taps told me every day that critical works of art disarticulate the sensible and model new futures to lay pathways for new political imaginations. He has never cleaned his pen and left it to me. I regret telling him about Rancière. In the mornings, the human keeper sweeps, taps leaves away. I try to think of this impermanence in my sadness.
April 2nd, 1990. I learned today from the noisy humans outside the moat that during the Second World War, all of the bears except one, named Lotte, were killed here. The Bärenswinger itself was buried under rubble. It was only thanks to the intervention of concerned humans that the building was restored to an unusable function. On November 29, 1949, after several years of work, the Bärenswinger was reopened with 2 new bears, Nante and Jette. March 26, 1994. Some humans misunderstand my tenure here and believe that I'm entirely miserable. In truth, I'm sad sometimes and I'm happy sometimes, but I can't imagine that my life is all that much different from the humans who come visit me. I have known no other life, as they have known no other life, and we make do with the cages that we are given. September 14th, 2005. I started having dreams of Kaya's history and performances. I will italicize them here, so that you can tell that they are dreams and not real events. I'm sitting on a chair under a tree on a street at Columbia University in New York. I've just started school. I'm a man named Debo, and I've just met a woman named Kirsten. The studios here are dingy, but we have to pretend to be grateful because of how expensive the tuition is. I put up a mirror in my studio to make it feel a little bigger. This is the first dream of Kaya that I have. November 29th, 2007. I'm very sick. Actually, it's not me. It is Thilo, my partner. Maxi and I are distraught. No, thank you. Thank you. Thilo is very sick. Maxi and I are distraught. We are doing everything we can, but it looks like he will have to be sent away. He has chosen to lie down in the enclosure and hasn't moved for very long. At times he chants and I see glimmers of some other worlds in our space.
February 13th, 2010. I'm dreaming. It is Kaya's first performance at 179 Canal in New York City. This time, I'm a young girl from Texas named Kaya Serene. I am the daughter of a friend of Debo. The performance is a critical parody of the self-serious rituals of painting. Kirsten uses a giant paintbrush to exaggerate its phallic qualities. It feels like a party. March 24th, 2012. In hibernation, I've been dreaming almost non-stop. I'm at a gallery opening. It is Kaya's second performance at various small fires in Los Angeles. I much prefer this place to New York. I'm in Kirsten's her thoughts as they pass through, noting the color of their energy. Ancient, anxious thoughts. I am enjoying my success as an artist, but am troubled by the rapid branding of my image and work. I will manifest this into my practice to perform the self-consciousness in order to critique it, to resist it. Happy thoughts. This champagne is lovely.
November 20th, 2012. I woke up this morning to the sound of footsteps on our ceiling. 2 humans dressed as bears climbed a 10-meter ladder up to the roof of the cage and began to shout loudly. I learned that they are part of Berliner Bärenbündnis, Berlin Bear Alliance, founded in October 2012 by a number of animal welfare organizations under the motto Freiheit für Maxi und Schnute. They are causing nationwide headlines and pressing charges against official veterinarians. They have collected 20,000 signatures to free Maxi and me. They held a banner reading, "Animal torture is not tradition, free Maxi and Schnute." Eventually, the police accessed the roof via crane and brought down the activists. I wonder if the police were bears in human costumes. August 26, 2013. Maxi died last night from organ failure. She was 27 years old. This morning, there were lots of flowers around my cage. Lots of humans had lined up outside. Maxi's favorite song was Dancing on My Own by Robin. She said she liked it because it made her want to cry and dance at the same time. I hum it, alone in my cage now. The dreams have started to meld together. I'm in various different places, burying paintings, making things called body bags, which I'm treating like sleeping bags, but I think Kaya considers paintings. In one of them, I'm wearing a human costume on the front of my body. It's a part of a Kaya performance that doubles as a summer camp called Camp Kaya. At this point, I think they're really just doing whatever they want. It doesn't always make sense. Personally, it's not my cup of tea. July 12, 2014, the diet here is very strict. It keeps me on my toes. We are given fruit, everything except bananas, vegetables, except potatoes, radishes, peppers, white cabbage, meat from beef and poultry, as well as delicacies. And other times poplar, willow, or maple. Radishes were Maxi's favorite. October 12, 2015. I died today.
September 29th, 2018. This was the day I was reborn into the third body of Kaya. The enclosure in the Bärenzwinger is divided into 3 sections, each with a door in between that lets you transverse them. We began in the first chamber with Debo lying down on the ground. I sat next to him as Kirsten is in a bear costume. I thought of Tillo. In his last days, in his lethargy, he would just lie down inside the cages like Tillo. Debo was motionless until he began to chant. The other human who was part of the performance was a svelte female nurse. She began to scribble notes down on a pad using various instruments to check his heart rate and blood pressure. The top of her clipboard reads, Kaya, ho, na, ho, yo, healing performance for a sick painting. Debo was on top of a painting. I realized that the painting was actually pictures from past Kaya performances rendered in black and white outlines like a coloring book. It was at this point that I intervened. I wanted to make the audience aware that they were in the presence of a famous conceptual artist. Together with the nurse, we pulled Debo into the next room. I began to do what I could never do in life. I'm in black paint. I felt more connected to painting and death because now painting and myself are part of the same material, the third body of Kaya. In the third room, we brought the ritual to a close. I gave him a stick and poke tattoo with my signature.
December 15th, 2018. I've been spending times with mushrooms. They have given me a way to understand what these performances might be in the third body that I'm part of. Through deep meditation, I'm able to connect to the earth around me and learn from its wisdom. In these sessions, an entity not dissimilar to a divinity speaks to me in a way that is both pre- and post-linguistic. It is a form of connection that reveals the true impoverishment of earthly languages. Mycology is the branch of biology concerned with the study of fungi. Fungi are the oldest living beings on the planet, and they will likely far outlive our own existence. They will break down your body to return it to the earth, render you usable to future generations. Mushrooms, the caps and pods that you see, are only a small manifestations of the thousands of miles of connective tissue called mycelium that connects fungi all over the world under this earth crust. The ground breathes. Some believe that all life comes from this network below us. Kaya is modeled after this network, I think. February 15th, 2019. We are somewhat warm and beautiful, no longer in the spaces of the Bärenswinger. A sign reads, Villa Romana, Italy. Humans are lined up down the block waiting. The setup? A picture of a window reprinted opposite the real window. When people entered, a woman asked them questions, small, silly questions. Based on their answers, they were given a sculpture. They then took the sculpture and came over to me, as Kirsten the bear, and a man in a suit and took a picture in front of this fake window. Later in the night, I became the bartender and made watermelon smoothies on top of the mosaic that Kaya had made during their residency here. I used to pass the time in my residency burying letters. They passed it making this mosaic. We all find ways to pass time. Today. This is the day of my newest performance with Kaya. I'm back in New York, Artist Space. This time with the author of Kaya's last catalog essay and Kirsten Brett's studio assistant. Unclear who the third person is. A simple performance. I'm sitting. A xylophone rendition of Robin's dance on my own. Play softly. I dance in a small circle next to a head of lettuce that I peel slowly. On the ground is a vat of soil full of mushrooms. I bury the peels with my paws. We ask the audience to dance and cry together.
Hello. I'm really happy to be here with Kerstin and Devo, and as you heard already, I'm a former student of Kerstin, and I have been working with Kaya or in Camp Kaya in Bregenz, Kunsthalle Bregenz, Kunsthaus Bregenz, and I thought it would be nice to start with the very beginning, like Kerstin, the painter, Devo, the sculptor, and hear about your working process. Like, I mean, just tell us how that starts.
You mean like our working process or how the collaboration started?
I guess both things are connected, right?
Right.
Well, it started with a performance, but we already had a history of doing things together, but it wasn't like a collaboration. It was more,
I guess it was
friendly.
like
I don't know.
we were both studying at the same time at Columbia University between 2005 and 2007, and the first Kaya iteration didn't have the name Kaya yet, because it was basically it was an invitation to Debo by a project, a person who ran a project space who now runs a gallery. So the project space was called 179 Canal. The gallery now is 47 Canal. And she reached out to you and asked you if you would like to do an exhibition, I guess.
Yeah, and then Kirsten and I were talking about doing a show somewhere, so it seemed like kind of the perfect place. And then at some point, I think she asked us to do a show, but then she said there was a possibility that it was going to be canceled because the landlord who gave her the space for free wanted money all of a sudden. So Kirsten and I were thinking about how to raise money for her as part of our show.
And maybe that is kind of like a good example of like how we work, because it's often like somewhat of reaction to the given situation. So the first iteration of our collaboration without the name. Yet we were already thinking about like how can we actually deal with this fact of like it's a project space in downtown New York, rent is high, she might lose the space, so how can we raise money? At the same time, Debo had a visitor from Texas in New York who was Kaya, and that's, as we said in the text, was already mentioned that she was a daughter of a former colleague of his, and Debo used to babysit her, and now she was a teenager. So Debo was like, well, Kirsten, why don't we just include her into our process while we are working in the space, and also we were thinking, brainstorming, how could we actually raise the money. Meanwhile, we finished school, and I was like this so-called German painter and had already some kind of visibility, or it just started. So the idea was to kind of play with that situation, with that fact.
So, Debo, you invited Kirsten as your friend and colleague, but also because she was that painter, like with an important moment in her career?
Right. So she had a lot of like hype around her, and people wanted her work. And so we thought of like a way to play with that for the night. So we created a painting performance, kind of somewhat or totally based on Kirsten's name, basically, and like the need for her paintings.
So it was like Debo was actually doing the paintings underneath a self-built stage he was building.
Paintings over there.
Right, and he was making these paintings invisible to the audience. I pulled them out of underneath the stage, and I titled them and signed them, and then Margaret, the project space runner, was auctioning them off while we gave the stage to Kaya, and she was playing music and deconstructing one of your sculptures. And yeah, so, and then the money we raised, I mean, they went from, I don't know, $80 to $100 or something each, and the money we raised we actually symbolically and literally as well gave to Margaret towards the rent. And so that was our first iteration. Yeah. And then, so at the beginning there was no name, and there was just like given situations to us which we then reacted to, and a couple of auctions where we raised money and donated it to different spaces or organizations, or literally Kaya for her college fund. Yeah.
And after that first auction, you did more auctions, right?
We did a second one, yeah. You can see pictures over here. So it became a little bit more elaborate. Like I started making painting tools for Kirsten to sign to sign her name, because she was signing them as Kirsten still. She wasn't necessarily making them, but she was signing them.
So you, as the sculptor, were providing the tools for signing the paintings, and that was your job. So the second auction was the one in Los Angeles, and then the third one was at 47 Canal, right?
Yeah, and that was like kind of a major shift in our practice, because then we gave ourselves a name, which was Kaya, and still is. And we actually, the shift was that we actually had finally a studio together, and we kind of merged our studio practice. We were still working as singular artists, but still like the fact that we actually shared a studio made it much more obvious and also easier to have like this material clash of sculpture and painter. And I guess, yeah, this is kind of like how the like
it became a studio
based
practice.
on our practices now.
There's one other thing in the third auction that I think is pretty interesting, the gambling game. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we were still trying to play with this idea. I mean, I guess we started making objects where the price was not like $100, so we still wanted to play with this idea of like games that we always brought in, like, but we didn't want to do an auction again, so we wanted to basically create like a gambling game for the audience.
Well, also, coincidentally, we were asked by Monet de Paris, which is a famous mint in Paris, or outside Paris, who actually does editions coined by artists like Andy Warhol did one, or Rob Pruitt, many others. And so I was invited as the painter to design this mint, and this coin, and I didn't like it so much as a painter to answer that. But then I extended the invite to Kaya, and the design of the coin is actually like Debo's face and my brushstroke on top of his face, and many have it on their t-shirts here now. And so we were in the process of like designing this mint with the Monet de Paris, but then this show at 47 came up, and we reached out to the mint and asked, could we actually finally finish this mint, because we need the coins as tokens for this gambling game we want to do. And obviously they said no, they don't want to produce this edition coin for like a gallery space. And so then we thought, well, since we need a token, we might as well just fake it and use the same design with the original Monet de Paris, trademark. And we just printed it online and, used it then as a token for this gambling game we had in the back room of the gallery space. And the winner, we decided, of this gambling game can actually choose one of the works from the exhibition. So that work was basically taken away from the gallery. And we also didn't know which work, because we didn't know who's going to win and what they're going to choose. And then the money we raised in that case, we actually donated to Kaya, the teenager, for a college fund. And then maybe to just continue the process of Kaya and like to extend this like kind of typical way how we work is, what happened was that at that time Susanne Pfeffer, who used to be the director of the Friedrichianum in Kassel, she saw that exhibition and she was like, okay, I would like to invite you to this group show, Speculation on Anomalous Materials, but I don't have funds to ship the staircase. We had a fire staircase in the middle of the space, which ran into nothing, just the ceiling, and we used it as a performance stage for our friend for drag queen performance. And Kaya, the teenager, was tagging the staircase. So when we were not allowed to bring the staircase, we were kind of like disappointed. We thought, well, this is actually the spine of the show. And when we actually did a site visit in Kassel, we thought the rotunda really reminded us of the L train tunnel in New York, like a subway system. And so it was the first institutional invitation we had. So we thought we kind of use it in a symbolic way that we almost use a grown-up version of the tags of the staircase. And we reached out to the somewhat known, or actually very known, graffiti artist Nomad in Germany. And the reason why we chose him was that his graffitis, especially his silver writings, are not necessarily like a reference to street art, but actually they look like machines, or like kind of almost these breathing systems, which we then wanted to connect to the works we did, the body bags. So it became like one organism. Okay, so these body bags end up in Kassel in the show, and of course part of the body bags were these tokens with the Monet de Paris design on them. So what happened was, the woman from the Monet de Paris, the director, she saw that show as well, and she saw our works, and she was like, what is going on? You're already using the coin and the design. And instead of like complaining, she was like, well, we might as well now start the printing press. And we thought this was like kind of really beautiful, because you basically create the original after you already forged the original. And so that was one part. But the other interesting, at least for us, reacting to an institutional situation, sorry, I'm monologuing, but I just want to finish with the donation, because basically we brought this giant art box, this giant art piece, which was a life-size box which Devo made, and because we knew the Friedrichianum doesn't have a collection, but we wanted to donate something, so we actually knew, obviously, Friedrichianum has a big history with Documenta, and the Friedrichsplatz right in front of Friedrichianum, there's Walter Di Maria's Earth Kilometer, there's like Joseph Beuys' 7,000 Oaks, so we were like, perfect place for us to bury this artwork and donate it to the museum, which doesn't have a collection yet. So then part of the show was actually the video of the burial, as well as a donation letter to Susanne Pfeffer and her institution, and like a footprint, how to find it, how many meters into the Friedrichsplatz and how many meters down. Now I'm done monologuing.
So again, all the things just fall in place and you deal with the situation and transform it into the next step of Kaya, right?
Yeah.
Great. Maybe you have been talking about the body bags already for a bit. So, Thibaut, how's the history of the body bag?
The body bag. So, yeah, I guess that's when we first kind of really started making Kaya a studio practice. And I guess I made one body bag with my solo practice before that, kind of in the same spirit. It was holding like items from past performances and things like that. And I threw them in this plastic vinyl bag and added small belts on them from the performance, and it kind of created this bag. And so I had one, but then I tried to make a second one, and I was really stuck, mostly because I didn't have any more tools from past performances, so I was trying to create things to put in the bag, and it just wasn't working. And Kirsten gave me a few paintings for Mylar paintings for an upcoming show we wanted to do. And I, was free to cut up her paintings, do anything I wanted with them. So I placed one of her paintings on top of one of my sculptures that wasn't working and placed it in the body bag. And, we also had leftover things from performances, like paintbrushes that I made for this very small fire show. So they started that's how they were kind of started.
And I would also say, I think the interest is like painting in relation to the body. So whether it's like a physical body or a social body, like an extended community, or a psychological body. So in that sense, it was like on a material level for us interesting that it was both on transparent material, the paintings themselves, they had like these mask structures or like face characters, and to really kind of proceed, like it was like a DIY plastic surgery procedure on the paintings, so we really were like drilling and cutting into them, sewing them back together, putting these like performance items or leftover from Devo's sculptures into it so that they became like these limbs or like these weird animatronic kind of extensions of the painting. And I think that is on a material level, like very literal, even though it sounds so random, but it's actually kind of very harsh and specific. How we work on that in the studio. And then I think what's also really typical is that depending, what I said before, also depending on the situation, like whether it is a former studio assistant or it's a friend, or it's like literally in your case in 2014 when I was a professor, guest professor in Munich, and we were invited by Eva Birkenstock for the summer camp in Bregenz. We were like, well, that's a great opportunity to actually do like this like week-long workshop and extend the invite to the students. And yeah, so I guess it's almost like this kind of like rhizosomatic or like octopus-like structure which reaches out into different situations, and it all feeds into the practice and the organism.
But it definitely has two parts, like the performative part where things get activated or charged by actual like burials or processions or performances, and then there's the material part where, Debo, in your practice you recycle things, you also activate them, but you transform them into different things. And Kirsten, you try to give a body to the painting, and then when these two things come together, it happens that, for example, Debo gives a container to a painting and both merge.
We sometimes switch roles also, you don't know. But yeah, I mean with the body bags it's that case, but I mean right now what we're looking at is actually a former bathroom locker in our studio in New York, in our former studio, and we tiled it. And actually what happened, it's also kind of typical for us that we stumble into this like strange situations. So we had the studio, and the bathroom was really interesting because it looked like a film set, and we were like, oh, we can really work with that and maybe perform in there or transform it into a sculpture. And the owner was like, no problem, it's all trash, you can take it. So we turned it into the sculpture and we exhibited at the Whitney Biennial. And I don't know, a couple days later I get a letter from a lawyer. My
bathroom.
my client, so-and-so, sees her bathroom in the Whitney Museum. She wants it back right now. So we were like, well, we had to reproduce the trash, which we were supposed to throw away. We had to reproduce it so that she can store it in the basement, because obviously she didn't want it back in the bathroom. So yeah, but this is like kind of these like weird situations where I would say typical is that we kind of open the door to like this kind of maybe uncanniness which could happen, and most of the time it also happens, and then we kind of embrace it and bring it into the situation.
This third body that you have been mentioning also in the text is like a parameter that stands between you, and that's like in an activity of reaching out or spreading, you just embrace the surrounding and build from that.
Yeah, I think it was kind of scary just having it where we thought it was just between the two of us. So I mean, at the beginning,
it was literally like the teenager who we didn't know what's going to happen if you invite a teenager to an exhibition and also an auction. So I think we wanted to put ourselves into this almost like really unstable situation, and maybe vulnerable, and maybe it's embarrassing, maybe it's like, yeah, it's just like unknown. Mm-hmm. And this could be another person, it could be a situation which we can't predict what's going to happen. It could be literally, in this case, we watched the video. I mean, it's the bear character was emerged by an invite from a Bärenzwinger, which used to be, I don't know if it's still an exhibition space, but it was an exhibition space in Berlin, and it was literally a former bear pit. So we thought, why not bring the bear back and then started to work with this character, and that's also like somewhat of an unknown of like, because the sick painting, I mean, this class is also called sick painting, and in this performance case was actually the sick painting, or like the representative of the sick painting, and the bear is trying to, you know, intervene and interact and kind of heal that sick painting body.
So the performance at Bernswinger is also the beginning of a new, by introducing a new set of, like expanding the narrative into a different direction.
Right, because it's easy for both of us just to be in the studio and have it be about formal experimentation. We're comfortable with that, but yeah, any sort of performance brings in an element that we're not so comfortable with, but it like expands our practice.
So whenever you reach an end, you try to expand more and push the boundaries again?
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, depending on the situation, but yes. Yeah, and I mean, also with the bear, I mean, literally, I was just mentioning this like kind of extended body of Kaya, and in this case, we knew the like 3 steps of what the bear would do. We had like kind of in the first bear pit, we had the reference to boys, like I like America, America likes me, so it's like the bear with the human, but the human was like the representative of the sick painting. It was like this kind of becoming acquainted with each other. And then the second one is literally a reference to McCarthy's The Painter, where suddenly the bear stands upright and uses these tools, these enlarged tools, to paint, use Debo's body as a palette and paint it. And it's like this kind of initiation ritual, whereas then in the third pit, the bear actually finally channels this like bear language and puts runes onto Debo's body with a stick. And so there also, I mean, he didn't know what I'm gonna do, I didn't know what I will do, so it was kind of like we all had an agreement, it will be a stick and poke tattoo, but how exactly it will end up during a 5-hour-long performance was unclear. It's 8. Maybe there's what?
Maybe we open and invite the audience to ask questions. If you have some, I think we could go on forever, but maybe it's time for others to bring in ideas.
Okay, I would like to have one question, actually, and because what I found impressive is the freedom to recycle not only works but also the context in which they exhibited, and I found this a very important point. So this is not just works, it's also contexts. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And because we haven't talked about that, and I think we should elaborate a little bit on that, because I think it brings in a different layer on actually what it means to create what I would call this kind of non-disclosure of your aesthetic production. Mm. So it's a continuous way of rethinking your aesthetics. Mm. And so maybe you can just say a few words about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's I tried to mention that with the Frizianum as an example, because that was like the first institution reaching out to us, and suddenly you had to deal with that situation. So it's, which is, in that sense, it's a, how to say, and not only that, also, or Brigands would be another one where, like, myself as a person, I was a professor. So that was my given situation, that was my life. So when we were invited to do the Kaya camp, we thought, well, if that's the reality, why don't we embrace that reality and bring it also in, even though we didn't know exactly what will happen, like how many students will participate, what will they perform, and how, so there's like an embrace of the situation, but there's also like an embracing of the unknown, I would say, which then might also be read as somewhat like a critique or kind of almost the opposite, like an embrace, like a worship. Could have different shapes, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the very start, we tried to expand into a larger community, and everything's kind of been a part of that. So when we did the auctions, we brought in like kind of everybody we knew. So we always kind of tried to stay with that spirit. And the body bags kind of hold history, and we always continued with like using our history just like material.
And maybe then with the auctions is also maybe what was interesting was, especially with the second one, it's not, everything is not until thought through until the very end. There's always like somewhat of a gap open to something spontaneous to happen. So, and what happened actually at the second auction, we were like kind of playing with the devil a little bit, because we were like, okay, there's like collectors, and of course that was the situation. These collectors came, and I'm realizing Debo's in the box, being plastered by Kaya, doesn't see anything. I'm with this like big painting stick trying to sign the paintings which are auctioned off, and I realize the only one who's bidding is the collector. And I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do now?
He came to buy every one.
He came to buy every one. So I'm like, okay, new rule, only 3 per person. So he sends out his friend and another friend. All in his...
I think they were Hollywood actors too.
Hollywood actor, sometimes with a hat, sometimes without. And so then what happened, and coincidentally but brilliantly, like one of the artists, one of our friends, was as a joke underbidding the collector. And in that moment I was like, this is genius. I'm just going to give it to the person who's underbidding, because this is a artist performance and not like whatever, like auction so and so. Of course the collector completely freaks out and like you know, shouts and screams, writes me emails with like 13 people in CC later, like with suing and threats, I don't know. But this, I'm just using this as an example of like, it was unpredictable what could happen, and we're still embracing this moment of like this unpredictability to then change the situation and like also shapeshift our own practice within it, I would say, right?
It's almost like you can change the logic of the situation by, you know, collaborating together and just setting the vibe for how it's going, right?
But maybe I can, on that note, quote Stefan Dillermuth, who obviously is not here with us today. And I know, Kerstin, you have to help me because I can't pronounce it, but there is, so he wrote, quote, note, Kaya is unstoppable experimental research that delivers new insights, to which Kaya countered, and I think it's Plattdeutsch, Ik bin bed op Ehud.
Ik bin bed op de hoek nat worden.
But you have to read it. So in a way, maybe...
Ik bin bed op Ehud nat worden. Which means basically I got soaking wet.
So maybe you can explain what this figure means. He kind of tries to bring up in the sense of what is more in a kind of discursive approach of Gaia, and then answering it in Plattdeutsch, in a kind of, yeah.
Maybe it's also like kind of liquefying our own practices and then merging it into this, I mean, what is mentioned as the third body. So it's this kind of watery unpredictability. That would be my kind of abstract answer to it.
Oh my God. Does your practice hold the possibility of failure? Or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, constantly.
Like real failure? Because I feel like you're transforming the failure, so it's not really failure, but is there ever a point where you're feeling you're actually failing and you can't go on? or even maybe like even the feeling of that, and then you might even transform it later, but how is that moment?
I think there's many moments of failure and also a feeling of failure, but I think what we do is then, instead of like trying to hide it or push it away, we try to work with that. And like even the coloring books, which some of you have worked with, like scraps from these coloring book canvases we made, is also an example of like, they weren't working at the first time we did them in 2017, I guess. And then, but we kept them along, almost like this kind of delay we embraced, which then they were used as the floor, they were used as a blanket for your sick body,
Right.
painting body.
Yeah, like kids cut them up, kids drew on them.
Yeah, and over the years they were changed and transformed until finally they reached this. This year had an exhibition with them, but the actual production of the work took like 5 years because the material was still with us and we didn't know how to solve that problem, and it felt very much like unresolved. So we just kept it along, and maybe that's somewhat what we do in general.
But yeah, we definitely feel like things are failing up until the last minute, I guess. But we really try to push through and not.
And then
like
in the end, I would
we never
also
have the feeling of failing after we have an exhibition or something.
I mean, another thing is also that, what does that anyway mean, failing, right? You could ask yourself this, anybody of us can ask yourself that, what failure means as an artist. And I think mainly, in general, I can also speak like as a solo artist. Of course, that's a certain practice you have, but then the minute when you reach out to collaborative practice, there is something which makes it more comfortable to work, because you always have like an encounter, you have another to like push against, there's some kind of resistance, but obviously that's also painful and annoying. And but then on the other hand, there's like trust you build, and I would say our interest is not just a collaboration between two people, but like some situation we're creating where like really like a community can be created, like an extended community, whether it's like in students, friends, acquaintances, directors. It could be anybody, depending on the.
But also with the constant dialogue, I've mentioned this to students. Since we're in constant dialogue making things, sometimes, like, Kirsten definitely makes me feel like I don't know how to make sculpture anymore. And it's the same, I make her feel like I know more about painting than she does. So it's like we have this feeling with each other that like, I mean, it's been like 13 years, but sometimes I'm like, oh man, I can't do, am I getting that bad now? Like, but it's back and forth constantly. But we have each other, so.
Thanks for the answer. I'm interested in what you said about like trust, because I was like wondering, like I feel like you need a lot of trust to do your practice, and I was wondering if you carry this along before you met and also have this in your own practice, or is it like something that happens while you're working, and is it like kind of increasing because you know each other better and you know your practice better? And I think with like, if you're going through like difficult, I don't know, performances, I think you have a new layer of trust. And I bet like now it's a bit different than, of course, in the beginning, like in every interaction with anyone. So I'm interested in the trust thingy.
I mean, it definitely wasn't there at the beginning, because I couldn't even read you.
I love your paintings.
Yeah,
like the first time I saw her work, I thought it was amazing at school. So I think we definitely really respected each other.
I mean, I didn't even understand you.
But I think there was like this like
curiosity,
respect.
Respect and curiosity, which then turned into a trust, I would say.
But we really always trusted each other's voice.
as individual.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's,
More so than anybody else, I think.
I wanted to say something, but I forgot. There was the second part of your question.
I think
Trust and...
But you also had to trust me with the various, I mean, the first performances, when we were talking about your kind of like current cachet,
Right.
that I wasn't just like trying
So
to
I
destroy
knew he was
her.
going to push me to the edge, and I felt so uncomfortable in the first performance where I was supposed to sign with my name. I was so embarrassed and so uncomfortable. At the same time, I knew he's not going to completely throw me into the ground. There must be something I have to just like give in and trust that situation, that this is not about me, and it's not about, it is about like a bigger, how you call that, a bigger reality or a bigger situation than just myself and my being embarrassed or something, my ego. And that I trusted. So that gave me confidence to put myself into the situation of feeling uncomfortable. Maybe that answers it a little bit. And by now, it's, I mean, with the trust also comes like, now we can make fun of ourselves or each other. So that's also part of it, where you know each other pretty well. And so it becomes also more difficult to create situations where we not know what's going to happen.
I'm curious if either of you have your own personal practices that you hold close, and if you find that having your own personal work helps to sustain your collaborative work, or if you prefer working with each other and working collaboratively after having done it for 13 years.
I mean, Kirsten has more of a solo practice. Like, I somewhat gave mine up. At some point, I couldn't handle two, like, in a family. And so to push Kaya, I was enjoying Kaya so much that to push it forward, I thought maybe I should let my own practice go a bit. But I mean, I draw, and that's about it now.
And I work as a painter in the extended field. So, yes. And I have other collaborations, but they are not that... Kaya is a very specific one, where when I so-called extend my questions to artisans, it's a different situation. It's not like a 13-year-long intense collaborative practice. Yeah.
Questions?
I was wondering in regards to I was wondering in regards to the non-color black and the gloomy atmosphere that sometimes appears in the work or elements, if there's any specific reference or intent, or like what do you associate it with?
The green, for example?
Actually, just black. Because it appears, it does seem to be like a constant...
Well, the green, I can tell you, comes from Suspiria.
Oh, okay.
And the black, I mean, that's...
There is a gloomy tone, even in the beginning of the movie. Like, I was wondering that that gloominess in the colors or mood.
Yeah, the color's black. I don't know. I guess nothing specific, but it seems to work with the collaboration and the combining of materials, and I guess it gives it a certain mood that we are both like we both like. I don't know.
I think the black also, I mean, I'm not so aware of, but what I associate with it is like the sculptural elements. They're often black. So they look like body parts in decay or something which had a life and is maybe still carrying something, like some memory of that.
And also, if Kirsten's paintings, if we talk about it that way, if I used color, it would just be so like a circus or something. So I think it just has like certain references, but not obvious ones, and tones everything down.
Hmm.
And I have one more question. When you're working, how do you calibrate within yourself and in collaboration between each other these elements of plasticity and sculptural, like the painterliness and the sculpturality of the elements? Like how did that in time form the language of Kaya, like fine tuning of like, I don't know.
It's like asking someone, how do you make a painting? I mean,
basically.
It's how do you make art?
Yeah.
You have been talking about the experimental. How did you say that? Like the experimental. Experimental material practice. You talked about that before.
Formal experimentation.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in a lot of ways that's when it came to the studio, when we're trying to make a new style of painting, I think that's kind of what we're doing and what we're thinking. Like to get started and...
I mean, it's also like we don't know in advance what's, there's a lot of conversations happening, a lot of questioning, we're throwing in ideas, they might not work. People are, that's kind of how it starts. If we have like a new body of work, it doesn't look like that at the beginning. I can assure you it takes a while until it ends up there, and maybe even to the very last minute that things might not work, and then because of the pressure or the time pressure or the deadline or some kind of challenge to watch each other, that we then arrive at a certain moment where we're like, this is it, now we know this is finished, and we can actually, say the work is finished.
And when that moment arises, can it take place? Do both of you say, okay, it's finished, or can one person say, I think this part is good, can you not paint over this, or is it just free writing?
I mean, often actually the work might not be finished, even though we might have already worked with it as a tool or as a performance tool, or there were cases where we already exhibited it and realized it's not finished, we have to continue working on it. That has happened several times also. Mm-hmm. And
it felt really natural because at the beginning I was cutting up my sculptures that I thought were finished to, put into the Kaya body bags. So I was used to like cutting up sculptures that like were being stored or just like sitting around me. So I wasn't thinking of things as being precious that are already finished. So.
Mm.
And one last question. Sorry. What artists have you been inspired by? Or influenced? That has influenced Kaya?
Well, we were really inspired were the catacombs in Naples, actually. When we were there for a project in 2017, I think.
A lot of
that was very major.
In Rome, too.
Rome. I mean, we love our colleagues. I don't know. I don't want to throw out names, because it feels so limited.
Any more questions? A last question, maybe? A last short one. Because I think everybody feels like getting up and get some air.
Short. I want to ask about this project Das Institute. I saw the show in Serpentine. I don't know which year it was. Is it still ongoing? So you have parallel collaborative projects?
It's in hibernation. It's still ongoing.
Okay.
But yeah, it's still ongoing. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Kerstin, Debo, and Kristina.
One more question.
Oh, one more question. Of course. If there's one more question, there's always a last question.
Thanks. I was noticing the various anecdotes about these points of friction between this practice that's trying to sort of reshape how artists are in the social context of the art world, where it might or might not work if you try to give a piece to someone who's underbid a collector. And I mean, first of all, I think it's really interesting because I associate practices that do that with a very different aesthetic that's very minimal. And so I think it's really interesting that you have this really ritualistic approach that kind of performs these actions better in many cases. And so my question is, are there moments that have surprised you in sort of trying to reshape those rules, either things that have worked or haven't, in how sort of artists exist in the world or the art market?
You mean within our own practice, moments which were surprising or unpredictable? I mean, that auction I mentioned was exactly that moment, because it was unclear what will happen. We only gave the score or the framework, that there was a certain amount of works. We didn't know the audience, we didn't know who would come and what will happen. And I guess the surprise was that luckily this artist friend had this kind of idea of underbidding. And then I was alert enough in the moment to react to that, in order to save my own, save the situation for myself. I mean, for Kaya.
Because it could have been really boring if one person, so you turned it more into an art performance instead of an auction. And
Yeah.
I don't think that man realized that.
Yeah.
He thought it was an auction by us, but it was an art performance.
It was, but it also
Yeah.
wasn't. So that was maybe the kind of oscillation between the two sides of the coin. And maybe that's exactly what we're trying to reach, is that oscillation, where you can't say the one side, you can't say the other, but it's really this balance between both.
I think we should now leave it here and take it into a more informal discussion over a cold beer. Thank you very much again, Debo, Kerstin, and Kristina, for running the conversation.
Thank you.
Last chance to introduce you to the rest of the program, so to say, which is tomorrow, the Crisscross number 7, the music program here, curated by Zsuzsa Holubowska, Agamala Herber, who will be present tomorrow and kind of present your music set from 10 p.m. onwards. We also have, who's wondering how that now then translates, not only in the Kaya Camp in Bregenz, but also into the Summer Academy in their course entitled Healing of a Bad Painting, is warmly invited to come to the open studios at the Fortress Hohen Salzburg from tomorrow 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. and also on Saturday from 10 to 1 p.m. And finally, the program concludes on 8th of September at the Galerie Kunst im Tracklerhaus with an exhibition by students of the Angewandte who actually went back to Kokoschka and kind of reinterpreting his school of seeing, which the whole program was basically dedicated. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming and staying. Wish you a coolish evening.